here. As of November 24th, Vital has been released. But the big question is it the Serum killer? No, I'm just kidding. What's good, everybody? Welcome to the video. As you all might have guessed, I am going to be reviewing the Vital synth that just came out from none other than Matt. And he has kind of been all over the internet. There's been a lot of preview buzz on here, not only on my channel, but on my peers' channels as well. And you would be kind of surprised if you don't know what I'm talking about. Today, I'm going to be giving you my unbiased review over this. Nobody paid me. Nobody gave me anything. Nobody called me and made death threats, although that would be funny because you don't make death threats to Alckemy. But, however, I do think that this synth is definitely worth covering. And if you are from Serum or you've been thinking about buying Serum, I'm here to kind of inform you all about this new synth that I think is pretty nice. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the price point. Within all of this stuff, they have quite a few different models that you can have. And speaking of different models, free, regardless of if this synth is the master amazing synth or not, just know that this is available for free. Wow. Anywho, the other models are actually really good. And I do want to make an extra point that I think that if you choose to interact with this particular program, that you should support the developer, which was made by one person. His name is Matt. I keep saying his last name wrong, so I'm going to abstain from that. But support the guy. He put a lot of heart and soul into this, and he, really made this happen at a point that he can even sell this thing for free. With all that being said, on the subscription model, you can kind of use it as a rent to own, which is even nicer at $5 a month. You pretty much get unlimited text to wavetable, which we'll talk about here in a second. You get some Discord stuff, you get prioritized support, all of these other goody things. On the Plus model, it's kind of flat for $25, and that kind of basically buys you a preset bank. And then on the Pro version, you have pretty much everything. And I mean, even at $80, this is competing with almost every other synth out there that does something involving wavetable or so, right? So the big question is, why would you not download this? By all means, unless if you really don't like this, it's free. Try it out. See if you like it. Okay, spiel out of the way. Let's go ahead and talk about the actual program. I'm going to be kind of covering briefly some of the features, and I'm not going to be going in depth to these things, but I'm just going to be telling you that they're there because I imagine that if you've been interested in Vital, you've already purchased it and you're just being nice and watching my content, or you kind of know what some of these things are. The information's out there. So yeah, I'm already late to this party. Anywho, I will be trying to talk about some things that are different from Vital to Serum in general, but I think the big thing that you all might want to know from me is whether or not this is going to replace everything else that I particularly use for sound design and music production in general. And we'll also talk about who this might be for and XYZ or whatever, so you can stick around to the end of the video. If you're looking for, is it worth it? Yes. Okay. Bye. No, stick around, please. Help me get into the algorithm. I'd appreciate that. So let's go ahead and get started. First off, here's the interface. It looks very similar to Serum. The big difference that you might notice over here is that instead of 2 oscillators, a sub, and a noise, you have 3 oscillators and a sampler. Now, this isn't a full-blown sampler, but you can still FM from it, and you can still upload anything in between, and you've got a couple of playback options that are kind of nice. But I do think that hopefully in the future, it would be cool if they added some other things with this as well that kind of give us a little bit more control within the sampler. And if you added a granular sampler within this, that'd be nice. So there's that. Within the other oscillators, everything else is kind of the same, except now we have a spectral morph option. And this is actually pretty neat. You can do a few different things right here that allow you to do different stuff. And the reason why that's so general is because like some of the ways that this behaves is very different. For example, if I, pull this up and I go into an inharmonic stretch, that's very different than going into something like a formant scale. But just know that within all of this, it's kind of like bending and kind of manipulation and stuff that's a little bit different than warp modes, if that makes sense. Speaking of warp nodes, we have some of those over here. We've got sync, formant, quantize, bend, squeeze, and pulse. And then we also have our different FM/ring modulation options that can kind of stem from anything that is a generator, as in making noise, not the generators that I make. Not joke. Yeah. So over here on our unison tab, we can kind of pull this all the way up to 16 voices. And this is kind of cool that this is on a percentage base. I do like the way that this sounds. That's already sounding pretty good to me. And if I wanted to do some cool Reese stuff that I always do in all of my tutorials, I think that you all would find yourselves being quite pleased. You can also shift the phase over here, and you kind of also have a randomization amount over there. So these are kind of standard features by today's things. You have an option to go between 2D and 3D. And then also with some of these things on here, if you find that there's some different options, for example, if I go into something like a bend, you'll see that there's this other stuff that you can do as well. So you've got this, and then you have this other degree of control in some way or another too. And so if you're going into like adding LFOs and all that other cool stuff, you can get a really complex waveform by the end. Speaking of, ignore the beta, but over here on this side, you'll see that there's actually an oscilloscope that will kind of tell you what's going out in the final product. Now, this is easily overlooked, but I think that this is actually incredibly important, especially if you're new to sound design, because this is a tool that you can use to teach you how to read waveforms. For example, if I go over here, and this is kind of there in one way or another, you can kind of see that these are the characteristics of a saw wave. And if you keep manipulating this and you keep adding stuff to create a more complex form, then that might help you start to trace down capturing other means of sound design. This is a feature that I think should be in like every synth ever, especially if you're trying to use this as a teaching tool. So you've got up to 4 macros over here. You can map anything in one way or another. You can also kind of do the same thing with the envelopes and LFOs. If you right click, then you can, sorry, I got to right click on that. You can make bipolar. And you also have the option to make it stereo. So that means that these are going to interact differently with each other between the left and right channel, which can sometimes introduce some interesting movement as well. So interesting. It's different. It's weird. Yeah. And just imagine like applying that stuff to filters and stuff. It gets pretty cool, right? Before I go on, let's go ahead and talk about the wavetable super quick. You go here. This was really confusing to me at first, but if you have any experience in video editing, then it's kind of the same thing where you go in, you add a keyframe, and then what you do is you add some kind of change between that keyframe. So you'll go into like add modifier or something over here, and then go kind of like that. And then as you cycle through the waveform, it will begin to change in that way. You can do some other cool stuff, such as here of wave sourcing and line sourcing. I haven't spent the time to figure out what that is yet, but just know that it exists. And you can do different forms like this to change and whatnot. And so one thing that you can do that's really easy is to just draw in different harmonics or change the value of sorts. So that way the waveform will change slowly over time in this way. It's a different workflow than I'm particularly used to. It's not really something that I even mess with a lot. Like wavetables aren't really my thing. That's a glurk thing, but hey, it's all there. As far as just like making wavetables, you can also use this snap feature, which is kind of neat, where you can kind of just draw in this way and kind of do different things of that nature. And then you can also change the grid. You can also click here and then go into a waveform blend, XYZ, and then you can do some interesting things along that nature. Just get lost and play with lines. So that's how you get into your wavetable stuff. If you want to do some FM junk and all that, you just go into FM and then it's kind of the same thing. That actually sounds kind of cool. And then after that, everything can go into either 1 or 2 or both filters. And you can kind of control that here. And you can also send everything to a direct output, which is also kind of cool. So that way you can kind of have some means of like parallel processing, or maybe you want to make something complex and have a separate sub. You can do that as well, or just a separate sound in general that you don't want to go through the effects. I do appreciate that this has a little bit of routing flexibility in order for you to kind of shape the whole sound, and like more control with sound is always better, long story short. So between this stuff, you've got your filters over here, and you have the ability to shape all of these in some way or another. You've got your resonance over here on the right, and then down here, you've got the ability to kind of mess with the cutoff. You've got some drive stuff, you've got key tracking, and then you can also dictate to what's being sent from here and also where it's going to. So right now, this is getting everything from filter, from oscillator 1, oscillator 2, 3, 4, and sample. And then if you wanted this to kind of go in reverse, then you can actually send this into from filter 2. So this would go into here. But keep in mind that you can't do both, right? So either one is usually going into the other, although I think with these, you can kind of have both of these send into these two to create like a parallel signal and stuff. But you can't do both filter 1 and filter 2. It has to be one or the other. So yeah, over here on the right, you've got 3 envelopes and there's a lot of control. You got your delay, your ADSR settings, and all that stuff. You can kind of resize this, which is kind of nice. You've got this paint tool over here that you can do stepping things with. That's kind of cool too. You just click the little paint thing and then it will go like that. So if you're just trying to do like some quick drawing stuff, this is really handy. And then if you want to change it to curves, then you can kind of go here, turn this off, and then you can start to curve them in this way. So it's very easy to create some complex LFOs without having to kind of jump too far off in the deep end. You can do other things. There's a lot of options in here as well, especially if you have the full kind of, I guess, package whenever you purchase this. But just know that there's a lot of options that you can kind of configure within all that stuff. So you've got your different modes that you can take a look at here. And then you've also got some standard settings like smooth, delay, and stereoizing this, which is kind of cool. Here's your time modes. This can go all the way down to 128, or all the way up to 128 seconds, and then all the way down to 0.1 seconds, 0.001 seconds, or 1,000th of a second. So there's a lot, like this can be manipulated by quite a bit. You can also LFO another LFO. I imagine that you would all expect that, I guess, in some way or another. But one new thing that I think that you all will enjoy is the ability to have randomizers. And I think that there's up to 4 different randomizers, I want to say. So it works in the same way, but instead of having like a multi-stage envelope or whatever, then you kind of just toss this on something, and then you can toss that on something, and then XYZ. You can sync this to a time, you can have it go free-flowing, and then you can also do the same thing that I was talking about with stereoizing the LFO thing. So you can do that in the same instance here. And then you've got 4 different styles. The Berlin is kind of like, I guess, just a kind of curved line behavior pattern in some way or another. I'm going to turn the stereo off. Then you've also got the sample and hold, which is kind of like your stepper. You've got sine interpolation. And then this one is kind of like a figure 8 of some sort. You just kind of have to mess with it in some way or another to kind of watch the behavior. But I do appreciate that this kind of shows you what's happening as opposed to like me having to say it's this, this, or this. This does support MPE, and kind of assigning those functions are over here. So you've got pressure, you've got slide, you've got velocity, you've got pitch, and then you've got aftertouch. And these 5, with your powers combined, complete this completes MPE, Captain MPE. You've also got stereoizing, you've got its own dedicated randomizer kind of function, then you've got octave note over here. So you kind of just assign that, and by, it's like key tracking, but by octave. And then you can also manipulate the slope. You can have your legato or octave scale, XYZ, and that's all there. One feature that I don't want you to overlook is the spread feature. This is great because you can really just like super quickly make everything mono if you want to. And then I guess if you want the pitch wheel stuff and the mod wheel stuff, it's over here as well. I think that like, I don't know. It's okay. I guess it makes sense over here for macros and then also like the mod stuff, but I kind of also feel like in some way or another it should be over here. I don't really know how I feel about that, but just know that you'll have to look in a few different places to see where all the options are. So yeah, let's go ahead and go into the effects. You've got your chorus. This sounds great. You've got your compressor. By default, the compressor turns on to an OTT. You have to do some messing with this to do it otherwise, because in theory, it behaves kind of like Ableton's multiband dynamics or like OTT from Extra Records, but it's different. It's not bad. It doesn't sound bad at all, but it's different. You do have some options over here too, which kind of go into all of these of multiband, low band, high band, and single band. However, everything else is kind of standard to where like if you push down, then you're doing compression, and then this is your threshold, and then you've also got expansion, and then you've got that. So yeah, all that stuff is there. I'm gonna turn that back off. Yeah, chorus is great. That's all I have to say, is turn it on, see what happens. Here you have your delay mode. There's nothing that's very substantial about this other than kind of like having the ability to do 2 different modes and then changing the timing of each one, which is kind of cool that you can do that. I think that you can also do that in Serum. And then you've also got a cutoff over here. And then this is actually like resonance, I want to say, because if the spread is down, it's going to turn the bandpass to more narrow. And if the spread is wide, it's going to cover more frequencies. So think of this like some kind of filter. Next up, we have distortion. And there are not as many distortion types as there are in Serum. Unfortunately, there's no wave shaper in here. That's okay, because honestly, the soft clip sounds great. And I think that you will be pretty happy between the drives that you have on the filters, as well as just the regular distortion unit, and then also the OTT compressor. You can also do some other things here that's kind of neat. The same thing applies here. You've got none pre-post, just like in Serum. You've got your cutoff right here, and then you can also change the shape as you normally would. Here we get into kind of one thing that's going to be a pretty big difference is that the EQ here actually has 3 bands now, but unfortunately, I wish that these could be 2 notches, just like Serum, but you have a low, kind of a low shelf, a high shelf, and then a notch. So it is kind of cool that you can create different things between that, but it's not quite the same. One thing that I think is pretty interesting though is that if you turn this on, then it will actually turn it into a full-blown notch as opposed to a bell curve. And then same thing with this. This is a shelf, which can turn into a a low cut or a high pass. And then the opposite for this, because I don't want to explain that in both terms. So yeah, you do have some more options, but you also are limited in options as well, right? You don't have that double kind of, I guess, bell that you may or may not be used to, but it is a little bit more versatile just as far as like as a single unit, what you have options for, right? So speaking of the filters, all of these have the same filter types between them. It's kind of nice that on this, you actually have a visual now between all that stuff, because normally you would only have a visual for the filter on the first page, and then if you came over here, like you wouldn't really know what it is that you were looking at. And I want to say that a lot of the cooler filters that were kind of found in Serum's late cycle were discovered through this page, but now you kind of have the ability to kind of take a look. So kind of like how I said before, you've got all of these that you can morph and kind of change the cutoff, change the resonance, XYZ, but you've got this list of filters in between all of this. So you've got analog, dirty, ladder, digital, diode. Formant, there's some nice formant filters in here, by the way, some combs, and phaser, either positive or negative. So between all that stuff, you know, you have these different selections of different slopes of different notch blends, I guess, which is kind of neat. This one is particularly useful because this is like the Ableton filter that has a, like the quote unquote morph mode. This is actually a really useful one to use in some cases. I think if we switch that over there, add that one. Yeah, this is a good one. Yeah, that's a good one right there. Switching like that. It's good stuff. Sorry, tangent. Next up is the flanger. Flanger is kind of basic, and it's nothing that's really amazing. It sounds fine. You know, it has that typical tearing sound, which I think sounds fine, but again, it's kind of nothing that's super crazy. Then we have our phaser. I really like this phaser. I like the fact that it can go into freeze mode, and then you can kind of change the offset and then further control this with the center. So having a relationship between these and this moving can actually be like, get you some really cool stuff, especially if you're into vocal tonalities. You've also got this function up here. I guess this is how many poles of the phaser it is. That's what that looks like to me. So 4, 8, 16, I'd imagine. I can't count, so don't quote me, but that's what it seems like. Yeah, having like just a little bit of subtle movement on the center here, whenever you're doing bass, can lead to some really cool stuff. I covered that in a video from a while ago. So for the last of the effects, we've got our reverb, which does sound really good. This is a really high quality reverb, but one like kind of qualm that I have with it is that when this turns off, I really want it to turn off, but sometimes whenever I was doing randomization, and it could be because I was in the beta, like it would still kind of ring through in some ways. In this case, it seems to be working the way that it's intended, but yeah, that was just one thing that I was like, eh. But yeah, you've got this low cut and high cut that's kind of like Ableton, if you're used to that. You've got some nice chorus on this as well, and then some nice time. It's really good for cloudy, like super pads. In a world full of reviews, you chose to watch this one. Alckemy reviews Vital. Fitting, right? Okay, let's move on. So that pretty much explains the kind of major, I guess, things about Vital, but we still have a couple of other kind of cool features to talk about. The first one is one that I had already talked about in the last video, which is text to wavetable. We can text subscribe to Alckemy. I'm spelling this correctly because otherwise they won't pronounce it. But if you type in enter, then you can go like this. And that's pretty much one of those features that is a great way to kind of start and gain wavetables. My recommendation, aside from the video that I posted from before, would be to type in something like this and then go in here and then maybe mess with some of the wavetable parameters and all that to make some cool changes and whatnot, or just, you know, be the new modern talking. It's fine. Do what you want. Whatever. Okay. Next up, this is perhaps one of the biggest features on here that I think is important, which is mod remapping. So between all of the modulators that you have over on your matrix thing, you can pretty much kind of give or introduce some kind of bias towards these that will allow you to kind of stay within a certain like scope of, I guess, like a 0 to 127 value, right? So if I go on here and there's a randomizer on this one, so let's go ahead and pull that one up here instead, you'll see that whenever this randomizes, it's going between 0 and all the way up, right? But if you can kind of set this into kind of like a strange envelope to where once it passes here, it can't go below or above this level, right? Does that kind of make sense? It's a little bit hard to kind of contextualize at first, but this is a really powerful thing because all of these act independently. So essentially, if you're doing something like randomizers or you're making some kind of complex bass that has, you know, an LFO on it, but you don't want it to go like past that certain resonance point that's just too peaky, this would be a great way for you to kind of do that. And then of course, you've also got these paint functions on here too that you can create something else with. And right now you can't really hear what's happening because I'm sure that I clicked on some kind of arbitrary thing for the randomizer. But if this were a filter, then no matter how this randomizes, the filter would never go past this point. Does that make a little bit more sense? And that is a super powerful feature between all this stuff. You've also got some morph biases here that you can do in this way. And then of course you can also like set LFO amounts to these kinds of things too, right? So you've got all of those cool little features that you might be used to in Serum. But wait, that's not it. Over here, you've got these really amazing unison options that I haven't really seen since like Massive, but even then this is a lot different, or behaves a lot differently than Massive. So you've got table spread, you've got spectral spreading, and you've got distortion spreading. I think you have to have 3 voices for this over here. So once this turns on, let's go to 5 and go to advanced. Now you have these 5 things that are over here, and you'll see them start to move in this way. And regardless of like what this is actually doing on paper, it's just good to know that you have a lot more control over what it is that you're doing. Okay, I figured it out. So this spreads the wavetables. This was a feature that I was actually talking about in Bitwig. So Vital actually did that feature to where the different unison voices can kind of spread across the table. The spectral spread is if you have like the vocoder thing turned on or whatever, then this will kind of spread along the spectral morphing. And then if you have distortion turned on, then this will spread out the distortion to different voices. So that is super duper cool. And you can do that to all 3 oscillators. As I said before, you've got MPE that you can enable. That's where those functions come in. You've got some oversampling options. Then you've got some displays. You have a spectrum over here. And then you've got another analysis right here that's also should be the same as up here. So yeah, this is great because if you're trying to kind of figure out, or you're kind of new to sound design or whatever, you're trying to see like what's happening, you've got not only an oscilloscope, but you've got a frequency spectrum here that you can kind of identify what's actually happening within your sound. This is yes. That's all I can say. This is yes. Yeah. With all those things being said, that's pretty much the biggest kind of in-depth analysis of Vital in its own right. There's a lot of really cool things that you can do once you kind of get into kind of, I guess, using all these things in combination with each other. But why would I pick this over Serum? Well, because it's free. I mean, it's free. How can you beat that? If anything, like you can use this in conjunction with Serum because Serum still is a great synth. But the thing is that Vital is a new synth. It has almost all of the features that are within Serum. It might not have some of the newer stuff, like the ability to kind of, like, I guess, do like the XY thing, the modulate points or whatever, or bounce, or like immediately kind of like bounce to audio. But this has the text to wavetable. This has the MPE functionality. This has kind of, I think, a nicer array of effects, in my opinion. I think that these are much more high quality. The matrix modulation is pretty insane. The stereoizing, the randomizers that are built in, the ability to kind of change the unison modes to this degree. Yeah, there's quite a lot to like about this synth. So I would say personally, if you don't own Serum, get Vital. It's a cheaper option. Pretty much every tutorial that you watch on YouTube right now can be almost directly applied one-to-one to Vital because they're so similar. If you already own Serum, then I would say just download the free version for now and see how it caters towards your workflow. Okay, well, what is your workflow? And this comes down to the biggest question is this going to replace what I do normally between something like Faceplant? No, by all means, no. And the reason why is because pretty much I've kind of found myself not exclusively using, but I found such a good home within Faceplant in general that I have learned to use that incredibly efficiently. But you have to remember that like Faceplant is at a completely different price point, and it's geared towards like being a more complete system and also caters towards a lot more exploration and experimentation as opposed to something like this. Now, can you experiment with this? Absolutely. And the fact that I'm in Bitwig means that everything in here is relatively modular, right? But I think that you will find the best home, at least for now in the beginning stages, of using Vital for a very quick way to do something deliberate. So if you want to make a bass or something that has a very specific movement pattern or does the same thing every time you press the key, this is a great place to start. For me personally, for you all who knows that I like to do a lot of experimental sound design, I like stacking the infinite amount of effects to a certain degree that my CPU can handle and then having a randomizer and everything to see what happens. And then whenever I do bass design, it's kind of like a mix between those, if that makes sense. So while I am going to continue to spend time with this, and while I am going to kind of see the other things between Vital that I don't know about yet, because of course I don't know everything about it, it just came out, I still have a home within those other things. This does not compete with Faceplant. This does not compete with Kilohearts. It's in a completely different realm for sound design and stuff. Does it have some unique features? Absolutely, and that's why I'm going to purchase it. Do I think that there's an amazing community behind this already? Absolutely, and I think that you all should be a part of the community too. Is it the Serum killer? If you're talking strictly about price, absolutely. If you're talking specifically about does it have, better killer features between the two, because Serum still has some unique stuff in comparison, that's going to be kind of up to you. And I would advise you to educate yourself and see whether that price difference, I'm not sure what Serum is right now, but versus $80 to whether those unique features are, going to kind of outweigh, I guess, what Vital has to offer, right? I think that a lot of you guys are going to like the text to wavetable stuff. There's a lot of really funny things that you can say in it. And there's a lot of even voices and things that you can do within this. Right now, this is in English with an accent. You can do English with the UK or US or Australian. And then you've got all of these other different kind of accents that you can do, which is pretty funny. If anything, to me, while you can make some cool stuff out of it, I think that most people will use it as a novelty as opposed to trying to get the most out of it. Please don't make this the next Modern Talking. Respect the feature. Respect the feature. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this video. If you guys have any questions regarding Vital, or if I missed anything, feel free to kind of leave that. I know that I didn't get really in depth to how every single little thing works, but this was designed to kind of just have some fun and kind of show you what this plugin has to offer and what it's about, as opposed to look at this sound. Because I think that as far as doing a review, it's very easy for people to get caught up with that. And while there is something to be said for people buying a synth for just the preset sounds, that's not me. I bought Atmosphere for that, which nothing is really competing with that, if that makes sense, for that price point. You're not my target audience for those people. So, if I miss something or you're disappointed that I didn't play a lot of sounds, I'm not trying to sell you the sounds. I'm trying to sell you the sound design capabilities, or I'm trying to inform you on the sound design capabilities rather. That's what's important to me. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed the video, I would always appreciate some kind of content interaction. Help me get into the algorithm. I'm well on my way to breaking 6K. Thank you guys so much for that. And I appreciate if you guys kind of stuck around for the whole 30 minutes-ish video. I had a lot of fun reviewing this. I hope that you guys had fun watching it. Let me know what your thoughts. Are you picking up Vital? Tell me what this stuff is all about. And I'll see you in the next video.